Hello, boring dreamers. Today we are stepping away from the sterile, fluorescent safety of modern medicine and walking straight into a shop where a haircut often came with a side of amputation. We are traveling back to the era of the barber surgeon, a time when the person trimming your beard was also the most qualified person in town to saw off your leg. You probably won't survive this appointment, at least not with all your limbs attached, but hey, at least you'll be clean-shaven for the funeral. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'm curious where in the world you are currently laying your head, so go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the middle of a street that feels less like a road and more like an open sewer. It is mid-afternoon in late medieval Europe, let's say London, though it could easily be Paris or Frankfurt, and the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the unmistakable earthy tang of unwashed humanity. The cobblestones beneath your boots are slick with a suspicious mud that you really don't want to investigate too closely. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, not just against the damp chill, but to create a small barrier between you and the chaotic bustle of the market day. Your destination isn't the tavern, though you could certainly use a drink, nor is it the church, though you might need a prayer soon. You are looking for a very specific sign. Above the heads of the crowd, cutting through the gray drabness of the timber-framed buildings, you see it. A long wooden pole, spiraled with stripes of red and white, jutting out from a storefront, like a silent scream frozen in wood. It's an image you recognize from the strip malls of your own time, usually spinning cheerfully next to a walk-in's welcome sign. But here, in the dim light of the 14th century, it carries a much heavier weight. You step toward it, dodging a cart filled with turnips and a stray dog that looks like it has seen better centuries. The shop itself is modest, nestled between a baker and a candle maker, which means the smells of yeast and tallow are fighting a losing battle against the metallic scent wafting from the barber's open door. You pause at the threshold. This is the domain of the barber surgeon. It is a place of transformation, where men come to be groomed, healed, or occasionally accidentally killed in the pursuit of wellness. As you push the heavy oak door open, the noise of the street fades into a dull murmur, replaced by the intimate sounds of the shop. A small bell tinkles above your head, a charming sound that belies the horrors that sometimes happen in the back chair. The room is warmer than outside, heated by a large hearth where water boils in copper pots. The air here is humid, heavy with the scent of herbal poultices, soap, and something sharper like old iron. The first thing you notice is the light. The windows are small, made of thick, uneven glass that distorts the world outside into smears of green and brown. To compensate, candles flicker on every available surface, casting long, dancing shadows against the plaster walls. In this flickering light, the tools of the trade gleam with a menace that is hard to ignore. Hanging on the walls, arranged with the pride of a craftsman, are the instruments. There are razors, of course, honed to a deadly edge on leather strops that hang limp like dead snakes. But next to the razors are other things: curved knives, terrifyingly large scissors, and saws that look far more suited for carpentry than for anatomy. You take a seat on a narrow wooden bench against the wall, joining a small queue of other patrons. This is the waiting room, the original social network. The barber shop is the heartbeat of the neighborhood's gossip. To your left, a merchant is complaining about the price of wool. To your right, a laborer is nursing a swollen jaw, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and terror. You are just here to observe, but the anxiety in the room is contagious. You can feel it in your stomach, a knot tightening as you look at the chair in the center of the room. It's a sturdy thing, that chair. It has to be. It's built of heavy oak, dark with age and stains that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove. It has armrests that are worn smooth by the gripping hands of thousands of patients who came before you. It's strange to think that in your time, people dread the dentist because of the noise of the drill or the pinch of the Novocaine needle. Here, looking at that chair, you realize that pain isn't a possibility. It's a guarantee. There is no anesthesia here, save for a stiff drink or a piece of leather to bite down on. The barber himself is currently busy with a customer. He's a burly man, wearing an apron that might have once been white, but is now a stiff canvas of brown and rust-colored splotches. He moves with a casual efficiency, chatting idly about the weather while he sharpens a razor on a strop. Schwick, schwick, schwick. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It's designed to soothe, but given the context, it feels more like a countdown. Let's talk about that pole outside again for a second while you wait. You know the one. In the modern world, it's just a logo, a piece of nostalgia. But here, it is a literal menu of services. The white stripe represents the bandage's linen strips that are washed, hung out to dry, and reused until they fall apart. The red stripe? Well, that's exactly what you think it is. It's the blood. In fact, the original poles weren't painted at all. They were the actual poles that patients would grip during a bloodletting procedure to make their veins bulge, wrapped in the bloody bandages to dry outside. It was a gruesome advertisement. We have clean bandages, and we know how to find a vein. There is a bit of a debate among history buffs about the blue stripe you sometimes see on modern poles. Some historians argue that the blue stripe represents venous blood, distinguishing it from the bright red arterial blood, while others claim it was simply a patriotic addition by American barbers centuries later to match their flag. Standing here in the 1300s, however, there is no blue stripe. There is only the red of the blood and the white of the linen, twisting together in a grim helix. The customer in the chair is finished. He stands up, looking a bit paler than when he sat down, rubbing a freshly shaven chin that is smooth but raw. He pays with a few coins, which the barber sweeps into a pouch of his belt. Then, the barber turns his eyes to you. Next, he grunts, wiping his hands on a rag that has seen better decades. You stand up, your legs feeling a little heavier than usual. You walk toward the chair, the floorboards creaking beneath your feet. As you sit, the wood is warm from the previous occupant. The barber throws a sheet over you. It's rough, smelling of lye soap and vinegar. He tilts your head back, exposing your throat. For a moment, you feel incredibly vulnerable. This man, this tradesman who likely can't read or write, holds your life in his hands. He isn't a university-trained doctor. He didn't study the ancient texts of Galen or Hippocrates in a lecture hall. He learned his trade by watching, by doing, and by making mistakes. He picks up a small bowl, working up a lather of soap. The brush feels stiff against your cheek. He applies the foam, his hands rough and calloused, yet surprisingly gentle. This is the duality of the barber-surgeon. He is capable of the delicate intimacy of a shave, gliding a razor millimeters from your jugular with the grace of an artist. Yet, in the next hour, those same hands might be using a mallet and chisel to crack open a skull or a pair of iron pliers to wrench a molar from a jawbone. As the blade touches your skin, you close your eyes. The sounds of the shop fade away, the bubbling water, the gossip, the street noise. There is only the scrape of the razor and the steady breathing of the man standing over you. You are in the safest and most dangerous place in the city, balanced on the razor's edge between grooming and surgery. And the strangest part? You trust him. You have to. Because in this world, if you have a toothache, a broken leg, or simply hair that's gotten too long, he is the only game in town. While you sit there, trying not to swallow your own tongue as the razor glides over your Adam's apple, you might be wondering how on earth we ended up here. How did we get to a point where the guy who trims your split ends is also the guy authorized to amputate your gangrenous toe? It seems like a massive administrative error, doesn't it? Like someone at the medieval job center mixed up the files for hairdresser and trauma surgeon, and everyone just went along with it for 500 years because they were too polite to complain. But the truth is, this strange marriage of scissors and scalpels didn't start in a shop like this. It started in the quiet, incense-filled halls of the church. To understand why you are risking your life in a barber's chair, you have to mentally travel back a little further to the 11th or 12th century. Imagine you are walking through the cloisters of a grand monastery. The air smells of beeswax and old parchment. It is quiet here, save for the rhythmic chanting of monks in the distance. For a long time, these monks were the primary healthcare providers of Europe. They were the ones who could read the Latin texts. They were the ones who grew the medicinal herbs in the cloister gardens. And they were the ones you went to if you had a mysterious lump or a persistent cough. The infirmary was as much a part of the monastery as the chapel. However, these holy men had a very specific grooming standard to maintain. You know, the look, the tonsure. That ring of hair with the bald spot right on top, looking like a fuzzy halo or a very unfortunate friction burn. Maintaining a perfect tonsure required constant upkeep. You couldn't just let it grow out. That would be sloppy, and God apparently hated sloppy hair. So every monastery had a resident barber, usually a lay person or a lower-ranking servant, whose entire job was to keep the monks' heads smooth and their faces clean-shaven. This barber lived among them, armed with his razors and shears, a humble servant to the learned men of God. But then, the politics of the soul got in the way of the mechanics of the body. Throughout the 12th century, the church hierarchy began to get a little squeamish about their priests and monks getting their hands dirty, literally. There was a growing sentiment that men of the cloth should focus on the spirit, not the messy, leaky vessels that contained it. Surgery is, by definition, a wet and chaotic business. It involves blood, pus, bile, and screams, none of which pair particularly well with silent contemplation and prayer. The hammer finally dropped at the Council of Tours in 1163. It was here that Pope Alexander III, a man who probably never had to worry about removing his own kidney stones, presided over a gathering that issued a decree effectively banning monks and priests from performing any surgery that involved shedding blood. There is a famous Latin maxim often cited in this context: Ecclesia abhorret a sanguine, or the church abhors blood. Now, historians still argue whether this specific phrase was actually written down at the Council of Tours, or if it was a later summary of the sentiment, but the effect was the same. The message was clear: put down the scalpel, Father, and pick up the Bible. This created a massive vacuum. People were still getting sick. They were still getting abscesses, broken bones, and infected wounds. The monks knew how to fix these things. They had the knowledge locked in their heads from reading Galen and Avicenna, but they were forbidden from doing the manual labor of the cure. They needed a proxy. They needed someone who had steady hands, someone who wasn't squeamish, someone who already owned a terrifying array of sharp knives, and most importantly, someone who was already standing right there in the room. They looked at the barber. You can almost picture the moment. A monk, perhaps suffering from a painful boil, looks at the papal decree, sighs, and then turns to the guy who is currently shaving his head. "Okay," the monk says, "I can't cut this boil out, but you can. I'll tell you where to cut, and you just do the thing." And just like that, the barber-surgeon was born. It was the ultimate case of workplace scope creep. One day you're shaving chins, the next day you're lancing boils, and a week later you're resetting a compound fracture while a priest reads instructions to you from a book you can understand. It made perfect sense in a twisted, pragmatic way. Barbers were already experts with blades. If you can shave a man's neck without slicing his jugular, you possess a level of dexterity that is highly transferable to surgery. They knew how to sharpen tools. They knew how to keep things relatively clean by medieval standards. which meant wiping the blood off with a slightly less bloody rag, and they were socially expendable. If a barber slipped and killed a patient, it was a tragedy, but it was a spiritual crisis in the same way it would be if a priest did it. So the monks kept the books, and the barbers got the blood. This split created a deep divide in medicine that lasted for centuries. It separated the physicians, the university-educated academics who diagnosed you by looking at your pee and checking your horoscope from the surgeons, who were viewed as manual laborers, practically on the same social level as butchers or carpenters. The physician was the architect. The barber was the bricklayer. The physician would stand over you, draped in fine robes, pointing at your ailment with a cane, because he wouldn't deign to touch you, while the barber rolled up his sleeves and waded in. This brings us back to you, sitting in this wooden chair, smelling the iron towel of the shop. The man scraping your face isn't just a groomer. He is the inheritor of a task the church deemed too gross for God's chosen. He is a tradesman of the flesh. The reason his shop is filled with razors and saws is that the Pope decided that shedding blood was a sin for the clergy, but a job for the help. It is a funny thing to think about as he wipes the remaining lather from your face with a hot, damp towel. The steam feels good, relaxing your muscles. You might almost forget that this same towel was likely used to mop up a bloodletting session earlier this morning. Speaking of which, you're looking a little flushed. Your complexion is a bit ruddy. In the eyes of a medieval medical practitioner, that's not a sign of health. It's a warning sign. It means your internal fluids are out of whack. And since you're already here, and the barber has his tools out, and the church says it's okay for him to cut you, maybe it's time we address that. The barber notices your red cheeks too. He sets down the razor and picks up something else, a small flame-like blade and a shallow brass bowl. He nods at a chart on the wall, a strange diagram of a human body covered in zodiac symbols. Suns in Aries, he mutters, grabbing your arm with a grip that is firm and inescapable. Good time for a bleed. You didn't ask for this. You just wanted a shave. But in the world of the barber surgeon, the line between grooming and medical intervention is non-existent. The monk isn't here to save you, and the physician is too expensive to call. It's just you, the barber, and the ancient belief that the best way to fill you with life is to drain a little bit of it out. The barber tightens a linen bandage around your upper arm, the tourniquet. It bites into your skin, snug and unyielding, causing the veins in the crook of your elbow to pop up like blue earthworms against the pale map of your flesh. You watch him work with a strange detachment. There is no panic, only a dull resignation. This is, after all, the most standard medical procedure in the known world. In your time, you might pop an ibuprofen for a headache or take an antihistamine for the sniffles. Here, for everything from plague to heartbreak to a mild case of indigestion, the answer is always the same. Open a vein and let the bad spirits leak out. He hands you a wooden staff. It's smooth, cylindrical, and polished by the sweat of 1,000 nervous palms before you. Squeeze, he commands. You grip it. The muscular action pumps your arm, forcing the vein to engorge even further. It's a moment of realization for you. You're holding the ancestor of the barber pole. The red and white striped icon spinning outside isn't just a design choice. It's a reenactment of this exact moment. The white bandage, the red blood, the wooden staff, and the downward spiral of the fluid. You are literally gripping the logo of the trade. The barber turns back to the wall to consult the chart again, just to be sure. This is the Zodiac Man, a ubiquitous medical diagram that looks less like a scientific text and more like a surrealist nightmare. It depicts a naked figure with various animals crawling all over him. A ram sits on the head, a crab pinches the chest, a lion mauls the heart, and 2 fish are nibbling on the feet. This isn't decorative art, it's a calendar. Medieval medicine is strictly governed by the stars. You cannot just cut into a body whenever you feel like it. You have to check the position of the moon. If the moon is in the sign of Gemini, the barber absolutely must not bleed the shoulders or arms, because Gemini rules those body parts. To cut them now would be to invite disaster, endless bleeding, or perhaps a withering of the limb. Fortunately for you, the barber mutters that the moon is currently in Libra, which rules the hips and kidneys. Your arms are fair game. He picks up the lancet. It's a small, double-edged blade, distinct from the shaving razor. It looks innocuous, almost like a penknife, but it is sharp enough to split a hair. He positions the tip over your basilica vein, the vein believed to be connected directly to the liver, the seat of blood production. Just a scratch, he says. It is the lie doctors have been telling patients for a millennium. With a practiced flick of his wrist, a motion halfway between a tap and a stab, he drives the metal into your skin. You feel a sharp, hot sting, like a wasp bite, followed immediately by a strange sensation of release. The pressure in your arm vanishes. A dark crimson stream arches out, caught deftly by the barber in a shallow bleeding bowl. Drip, drip. The sound is rhythmic, almost like rain hitting a tin roof. It joins the bubbling of the water pot and the crackle of the fire. You stare at the bowl, watching your own life essence pool in the brass bottom. In the logic of the time, this isn't just blood loss. It is a system reset. The medical theory governing your treatment is the doctrine of the four humors. According to this view, your body is a container for four distinct liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These fluids dictate everything about you, from your health to your personality. If you are sluggish and pale, you have too much phlegm. You are phlegmatic. If you are angry and irritable, you have too much yellow bile. You are choleric. If you are sad and poetic, staring out of rainy windows, you are drowning in black bile, making you melancholic. But you are red-faced, energetic, perhaps a bit warm to the touch. You are sanguine. You have too much blood. Your internal engine is flooded. The barber is simply draining the excess oil to stop the engine from overheating. It's plumbing, pure and simple. As the bowl fills, the barber leans in, peering at the liquid with the intensity of a tea leaf reader. He's checking the consistency. Is it frothy? That indicates wind in the veins. Is it dark and thick? Melancholy is present. Is it greasy on top? That could be consumption. Historians still argue whether these visual diagnoses were purely theatrical a way to justify the fee, or if veteran barber surgeons could genuinely detect certain systemic infections by the smell and viscosity of the blood. Either way, he nods approvingly. Good color, he grunts. The bad humors are flowing out. You start to feel lightheaded. The room swims a little. The edges of your vision blur, softening the harsh shadows of the tools on the wall. The barber notices your eyelids fluttering. This is the desired effect. In an era before chemical tranquilizers, bleeding a patient until they fainted was a crude but effective way to induce relaxation. If you are unconscious, you aren't complaining about your toothache anymore. Technically, the treatment is working. He decides you've lost enough, perhaps 10 or 12 ounces. He removes the tourniquet, and the flow slows to a trickle. He places a small pad of linen over the wound and wraps it tightly. This bandage, now stained with a fresh spot of red, will eventually be washed and hung on the pole outside, advertising to the next guy that the doctor is in. He offers you a cup of watered-down wine to help you rebuild your strength. As you sip it, feeling the woozy rush of endorphins that comes with blood loss, you realize something strange. You actually feel calm. Maybe it's the placebo effect. Maybe it's the drop in blood pressure. Or maybe it's just the relief that he didn't cut an artery. But bloodletting wasn't just for illness. It was a seasonal maintenance routine. Monks were bled regularly effectively to keep them docile and reduce sexual urges, a physiological, cold shower. Armies were bled before battles to prevent inflammation if they were wounded. It was the answer to everything. If you had a fever, they bled you to cool you down. If you were cold, they bled you to stimulate heat. It was a hammer, and every human problem looked like a nail. There is a grim irony to the practice, of course. We now know that bloodletting is generally a terrible idea. It weakens the immune system right when the body needs it most. It killed George Washington, who was aggressively bled for a throat infection, likely accelerating his death by draining nearly 40% of his blood volume in a single day. But sitting here in the 14th century, you don't know that. You only know that the pressure in your head is gone, replaced by a floating, airy sensation. The barber wipes the lead on his apron, leaving another rust-colored streak on the fabric. He looks at you with a satisfied grin. "You'll sleep well tonight," he promises, and he's right. Whether that sleep is natural or comatose is a detail best left to the scholars. But as you sit there, nursing your wine and cradling your bandaged arm, the barber isn't done with you yet. He noticed something while you had your mouth open, gasping from the prick of the lancet. He's peering at your jawline now, his brow furrowed. The bloodletting was the appetizer. The main course is about to be served, and it involves a pair of iron pliers that look like they were designed to pull nails out of a ship's hull. "Open up," he says, reaching for a tool that hasn't been washed since the Crusades. That back molar looks rodder than a dead fish. Your relaxation vanishes instantly. The warm fuzziness of the blood loss is replaced by a cold spike of adrenaline. You realize that while you can grow more blood, you only have one set of adult teeth, and the man about to remove one doesn't know what a root canal is. He only knows leverage. You are still in the chair, and the light-headed bliss of the bloodletting is fading fast, replaced by a cold, hard knot of dread in your stomach. The barber is looming over you, and the look in his eyes has shifted from the detached assessment of a plumber checking a drain to the focused intensity of a wrestler sizing up an opponent. He holds your jaw in a grip that feels like a vice clamp, his thumb pressing down on your tongue to keep it out of the way. He tilts your head back until you're staring directly at the soot-stained timber of the ceiling. "Open wide," he grunts, though with his fingers already prying your lips apart, it's not exactly a request. In the modern world, a trip to the dentist is a sterile, high-tech experience. You sit in a reclining chair that costs more than a car wearing cool sunglasses to block the glare of the LED lights, while a highly trained professional numbs your gums with a topical gel before injecting a localized anesthetic that renders your face delightfully insensate. You might feel pressure, sure, but pain, that's a failure of protocol. Here, in the barber-surgeon's shop, pain isn't a failure. It's the primary indicator that the procedure is happening. The barber reaches for his tool of choice. It isn't a drill. It isn't a delicate pick. It is a terrifying instrument known as a dental pelican. If you've never seen one, picture a pair of pliers that mated with a can opener and a grappling hook. It has a clawed shaft designed to hook over the top of the tooth and a curved bolster that rests against the side of your gum to act as a fulcrum. It is a tool based entirely on the physics of leverage. The idea isn't to gently coax the tooth out. It is to pry it sideways until the ligaments tear and the bone yields. But before he begins the demolition, let's talk about why he thinks he needs to pull it. The barber taps the offending molar with the handle of the pelican, sending a jolt of lightning through your jaw. "Worms," he mutters sagely. "You've got a tooth worm burrowing in there." This is the prevailing medical theory of dental decay. For thousands of years, people looked at the holes in rotting teeth and the gnawing pain that came with them, and they concluded that a tiny, invisible worm was literally eating the tooth from the inside out. It makes a certain kind of visual sense. Holes in wood are caused by worms. Holes in apples are caused by worms. So holes in teeth must be the same. The cure often involved inhaling the smoke of burning henbane seeds, which, coincidentally, looked like tiny black worms when they burst in the heat, confirming the bias of the observer. "Look," they would cry, "the worms have fallen out." The barber doesn't offer you henbane today. He offers you something simpler. He grabs a flask from a shelf and pours a generous measure of ardent spirits, a rough, fiery brandy, into a tin cup. He hands it to you. Swish it, he commands. Then swallow. It is the only anesthesia you are going to get. The alcohol burns your gums, momentarily distracting you from the throbbing molar, and then settles into your empty stomach with a warm glow. It won't stop the pain, but it might make you care about it slightly less. He steps in close. He smells of old sweat, garlic, and a metallic residue of the blood he just drained from your arm. He inserts the pelican into your mouth. The cold iron clicks against your enamel. You feel the claw hook over the top of the bad tooth, and the bolster presses too hard against the sensitive gum tissue of the healthy tooth next to it. This is the design flaw of the pelican. To save one tooth, it often crushes the neighbor. There is a moment of stillness. The shop falls quiet. Even the gossiping merchant in the corner stops to watch. This is spectator sport. Then, the barber leans back. He doesn't pull up. He twists. The torque is immense. You feel your head being dragged along with the motion, your neck straining against the headrest. There is a sound of wet, sickening crunch that seems to echo inside your own skull. It sounds like stepping on a dry branch in a quiet forest, magnified 10 times. That is the sound of the periodontal ligament snapping, and quite possibly a fragment of your alveolar bone fracturing. You want to scream, and maybe you do. A muffled, garbled noise trapped behind the iron hardware in your mouth. Your hands grip the armrests of the chair so tightly that splinters of the old wood dig into your palms. Tears spring involuntarily to your eyes, blurring the candlelight into starry streaks. The barber grunts with exertion. This is manual labor. He is wrestling the tooth out of your jaw. With one final wrenching twist, there is a sudden release of pressure. The resistance vanishes. The barber stumbles back a half step, holding the pelican aloft like a trophy. Clamped in its iron jaws is your molar, looking grim and bloody, with 3 long, curved roots dangling from it, like the legs of a spider. Out, he announces, dropping the tooth into a bucket that lands with a wet plink among thousands of others. Your mouth fills with the taste of copper and salt. You lean forward to spit into the bowl he offers. You run your tongue over the spot where the tooth used to be. It feels like a cavern, a raw, gaping crater in your gum line. And this is the miracle. The gnawing, pulsating ache of the worm is gone, replaced by the sharp, honest pain of a fresh wound. To stop the bleeding, the barber doesn't use sterile gauze. He reaches up to the rafters of the low ceiling and pulls down a handful of cobwebs. Yes, dusty, gray spider webs. It sounds horrific to modern ears, but spider silk is actually rich in vitamin K, which helps blood clot. It's a folk remedy that works, assuming the spider didn't leave any bacterial souvenirs behind. He stuffs the webs into the socket, packing it tight. While you sit there, dazed and nursing your jaw, consider for a moment the sheer variety of people who perform this service. You are lucky to be in a shop. Out in the countryside, you might have encountered an itinerant tooth drawer. These traveling showmen would set up stages in market squares, wearing necklaces made of hundreds of extracted human teeth, a gruesome resume clattering around their necks. They would employ drummers or trumpeters to play loudly during the extraction, not to entertain the crowd, but to drown out the screams of the patient so they wouldn't scare off the next customer. There is a fascinating scholarly debate happening right now regarding ancient dentistry. For a long time, historians believed that extraction was the only option, that restorative dentistry didn't exist. The barber wipes the pelican on his apron. He doesn't sanitize it. Why would he? Germ theory is 500 years away. He just hangs it back on the wall, ready for the next jaw. You did well, he says, giving you a rough pat on the shoulder that jars your throbbing head. Keep the webs in until sundown. Don't chew on that side for a week. You nod weakly. You have survived the haircut. You have survived the bloodletting. You have survived the extraction. You feel lighter. In a literal sense, you are missing blood and bone. But as you look around the shop, gathering your cloak, you see the barber turning his attention to a new arrival. This man isn't here for a shave. He is limping, supported by a crutch, his leg wrapped in filthy rags that are dark with stain. The barber's demeanor shifts again. The jovial tooth puller is gone. He looks at the leg, then at his array of knives. The mood in the shop darkens. You realize that while your ordeal was painful, it was merely cosmetic compared to what is coming. The rivalry between the men who cut hair and the men who read books is about to become very relevant, because the man with the limp needs a doctor, but all he has is a barber. And that tension, the war between the robe and the razor, is where we are heading next. As you sit there, gingerly pressing the spiderweb-filled socket in your jaw and trying to ignore the metallic taste of blood and brandy, the bell above the door jingles again. But this time, the reaction in the room is different. When you walked in, nobody looked up. When the laborer with the bad leg hobbled in, people offered sympathetic grimaces. But now, as the heavy oak door swings wide, the atmosphere shifts from casual camaraderie to stiff, respectful silence. Even the barber stops sharpening his razor. A man steps into the shop who looks like he took a wrong turn on his way to a royal coronation. He is draped in floor-length robes of heavy velvet, trimmed with fur that probably cost more than the barber's entire shop. He wears a square cap on his head, and in his hand, he carries a gold-headed cane which he holds up to his nose every few seconds. This isn't just a fashion statement. The head of the cane is hollow and filled with aromatic herbs and vinegar, a vinaigrette to ward off the miasma or bad air that he believes causes disease. And frankly, given the smell of the unwashed bodies and the open bucket of teeth in the corner, you can't really blame him. This is the physician. He is a doctor of physic, a university-trained academic who has spent years studying the works of Galen, Hippocrates, and Aristotle in the lecture halls of Paris, Bologna, or Oxford. In the social hierarchy of medicine, he is the general, and the barber is the grunt in the trenches. The gap between them is not just about money. It is about the fundamental definition of what it means to heal. He sweeps into the room, his robes rustling softly, and does not sit down. Sitting is for patients and tradesmen. He stands, looking around the shop with an expression of mild distaste, like a gourmet chef forced to inspect a fast food dumpster. He is here for a consultation on the man with the infected leg, but make no mistake, he will not be touching the leg. Touching is manual labor. Touching is for the lower classes. The physician operates on the intellectual plane. He diagnoses the imbalance of the humors, but he leaves the wet, messy work of fixing it to the instrument he commands, the barber. This dynamic is the result of that great divorce we talked about earlier, where the church separated the mind from the hand. The physician is a philosopher of the body. He speaks Latin, the language of God and science, which conveniently keeps the patient, and often the barber, completely in the dark about what is being discussed. Watch closely as he approaches the man with the bad leg. He doesn't roll up his sleeves. He doesn't palpate the swelling. Instead, he motions with his cane for the barber to expose the limb. The barber, wiping his hands on his apron, obeys instantly. There is a palpable tension here. The barber likely knows more about the practical reality of infection than the physician does. The barber has seen 1,000 gangrenous limbs. He knows the smell of rot that signals the end. The physician, however, has mostly read about them in books written 500 years ago by men who never performed an autopsy. The physician asks for a flask. The barber hurries to retrieve a glass vessel filled with the patient's urine. This is uroscopy, the gold standard of medieval diagnostics. The physician holds the flask up to the flickering candlelight, swirling it gently like a sommelier inspecting a vintage Pinot Noir. He peers at the color, the sediment, the foam. He is looking for signs of the humors. Is it cloudy? That implies an excess of phlegm. Is it reddish? Too much blood. In some cases, physicians would even taste the urine to check for sweetness, a primitive test for diabetes, though this gentleman looks far too dignified for that. Putredo in extremis, the physician murmurs, stroking his beard. The corruption stems from an excess of burnt collar settling in the lower members. The barber nods, though you catch a flicker of an eye roll. He knows it's not burnt collar. It's a splinter the guy got 3 weeks ago that went septic. But he stays silent. To speak up would be to violate the rigid class structure of the era. This rivalry of robes versus razors is one of the most fascinating and dysfunctional relationships in history. On one side, you have the long robes, the university physicians and the elite guild surgeons who considered themselves scholars. On the other side, you have the short robes, the barber-surgeons, named for their practical, shorter tunics that allowed them to move freely and get dirty. The long robes had the degrees. The short robes had the knives. Historians and sociologists still argue about the extent to which this hierarchy stifled medical progress. Some contend that by divorcing theory from practice, medicine stagnated for centuries. Because the people doing the thinking, physicians, never looked inside a body, and the people looking inside bodies, barbers, weren't allowed to do the thinking, anatomical knowledge hit a dead end. Galen, the ancient Roman authority, had made mistakes. He extrapolated human anatomy from pigs and monkeys, but because the physicians regarded his word as gospel, they never checked. And the barbers, who saw the insides of humans every day and knew Galen was wrong, didn't have the authority to correct the textbooks. Back in the shop, the consultation is concluding. The physician has decided on a course of action. He turns to the barber and delivers instructions in a tone one might use to order a servant to take out the trash. The corruption must be cauterized to prevent it from ascending to the heart. Apply the iron. The patient whimpers. The physician ignores him. His job is done. He has identified the problem and prescribed the solution. The execution is beneath him. He holds out a hand, and the patient's wife, who has been hovering anxiously in the corner, places a significant pouch of coins into his palm. The physician nods, turns on his heel, and sweeps out of the shop, holding his scented cane to his nose once more as he re-enters the contaminated street. He takes the money. He takes the prestige. If the patient survives, it will be hailed as a triumph of the physician's brilliant diagnosis. If the patient dies, it will be blamed on the barber's clumsy hands. Now, the room feels smaller, colder. The theoretical part is over. The theatrical performance of the robe has exited stage left, and all that remains is the razor. The barber looks at the man with the leg. There is no Latin now, no philosophy, just the brutal reality of physics and heat. Get the coals, the barber says to an apprentice you hadn't noticed before, a scrawny boy lurking in the shadows. This is the other side of the rivalry. The barber surgeon was the one who had to look the patient in the eye while inflicting the pain the physician ordered. It forged a strange, trauma-bonded trust between the community and the barber. You might respect the physician, but you knew the barber. He was your neighbor. He cut your hair for your wedding. He pulled your tooth when you were crying. And now, he is the one who has to press a red-hot iron against your flesh to save your life. As the apprentice fans the embers in the hearth, raising the temperature of the iron cautery tools, you realize that the shop is transforming again. It's not a dentist's office anymore. It's not a salon. It is becoming a battlefield operating theater. The rivalry between the robe and the razor has left this man in the chair with only one option: the rough, practical, agonizing mercy of the barber surgeon. The barber looks at you, still clutching your jaw. You might want to finish that brandy, he suggests, his voice dropping to a grim murmur. And maybe cover your ears. This next bit gets loud. You take his advice. You down the rest of the fiery spirit, the alcohol mixing with the lingering metallic taste in your mouth. You watch as the iron turns a dull, malevolent cherry red in the fire. The rivalry of the robes may be an academic debate for the history books, but for the man in the chair, the difference is academic in the worst way. The scholar has left the building, and the butcher is clocking in. The smell of singed flesh is something you never quite get used to. It hangs in the air of the shop long after the man with the infected leg has been carried out, a heavy, greasy scent that clings to your clothes and coats the back of your throat. It is a sensory reminder of the brutality of cauterization, the standard method for stopping bleeding and sealing wounds for centuries. You burn the tissue to save the life. It was crude, it was agonizing, and for a long time, it was the only trick in the book. But as you sit there, watching the barber wipe down his tools, the walls of the shop seem to dissolve. The quaint, timber-framed building fades away, replaced by the roar of cannons and the screams of dying men. We are moving from the street corner to the front lines. To understand how the barber surgeon evolved from a glorified butcher into a true medical professional, you have to follow him to war. War, as grim as it sounds, has always been the greatest medical school in history. And in the 16th century, the curriculum changed forever because of one man, Ambroise Paré. Imagine you're standing in the mud of a battlefield in northern Italy in 1537. The air is thick with smoke, but it's not just wood smoke anymore. It's the acrid, sulfurous stench of gunpowder. This is a new kind of war. Knights in shining armor are being blown apart by arquebuses and cannons. The wounds are different. They aren't clean sword cuts. They are ragged, torn messes of shattered bone and burnt tissue. The old medical books, written by men who only knew arrows and spears, are useless here. Enter Ambroise Paré. He's a young, uneducated barber surgeon from France. He doesn't speak Latin. He's never been to a university. He's just a guy with a razor and a lot of nerve, trying to patch up soldiers as fast as they fall. At this time, the standard treatment for gunshot wounds is horrific. The prevailing theory, taught by the high and mighty physicians back in Paris, is that gunpowder is poisonous. To cure the wound and neutralize the poison, the surgeon is supposed to pour boiling elderberry oil directly into the bullet hole. Yes, boiling oil. Imagine surviving a gunshot, only to have someone deep fry the wound 5 minutes later. So picture Paré in his tent, surrounded by groaning men. The oil is bubbling in a cauldron over the fire. He's working feverishly, pouring the scalding liquid into wounds, believing he is saving lives. But the battle is fierce. The casualties are overwhelming. And then something terrifying happens. He runs out of oil. Panic sets in. He has more wounded men lining up, bleeding and crying out. But the cure is gone. He can't just do nothing. So, in a moment of desperate improvisation, he rummages through his supplies. He finds egg yolks, oil of roses, and turpentine. He whips them together into a cool, soothing digestive salve that looks more like a salad dressing than a medicine. With trembling hands, he applies this mixture to the wounds of the remaining soldiers, bandaging them up with a sinking feeling in his gut. He goes to sleep that night, convinced that he will wake up to find those men dead from gunpowder poisoning. He tosses and turns, haunted by the thought that his failure to torture them with boiling oil has sealed their fate. But when dawn breaks and you walk with him through the rows of wounded, a miracle has occurred. The men who received the boiling oil are in agony. Their wounds are swollen, inflamed, and feverish. They are screaming in pain. But the men who got the digestive, the egg yolk, and rose oil mixture, they are sleeping peacefully. Their wounds are cool, the inflammation is down, and they are actually healing. Paré is stunned. He realizes in that moment that the books were wrong. The pain wasn't part of the cure. The pain was the problem. He famously writes later, "I resolved never more to burn thus poor men with gunshot wounds." It is a watershed moment. It is the victory of observation over dogma, of the barber over the academic. Paré didn't stop there. He tackled an even bigger problem, amputation. Remember the cautery irons we just saw in the shop? That was how you stopped the bleeding after sawing off a leg. You pressed a red-hot iron against the stump. It worked, but it left a massive burn that often got infected, and the shock alone could kill the patient. Pear thought about how he tied off the bladder of a pig when making sausages. If you can tie a knot to stop a liquid, why not do the same for blood vessels? He revived the use of the ligature using silk thread to tie off the arteries and veins during amputation. No fire, no sizzling flesh, just a delicate, skilled knot. The long-robed physicians were furious. Who was this unlettered barber to challenge the wisdom of the ancients? They called his ligatures dangerous. They said it was slower than cautery, which was true, and that the silk would cause infection, also true, since nothing was sterile yet. But the results spoke for themselves. Soldiers treated by Pear survived. Soldiers treated by the traditionalists died. You watch Pear work in your mind's eye. He is gentle. That's the revolutionary part. In a world where surgery was synonymous with violence, he introduced compassion. His motto, inscribed on his statue today, is a masterclass in humility. Je le pensai, Dieu le guérit. I dressed him, God healed him. Back in the barber shop, the atmosphere feels a little different now that you know this history. The tools on the wall still look menacing, but you can see the potential for change. The barber surgeon is no longer just a mechanic. He is an innovator. The battlefield forced him to discard the bad ideas of the past because, unlike the university professors, he had to look his failures in the face every morning. This shift didn't happen overnight. It took decades for Pear's ideas to trickle down from the battlefields of France to the local shop on the corner. But the seed was planted. The barber surgeon was beginning to prove that practical experience was worth more than ancient theory. But let's not get too comfortable with the idea of gentle surgery just yet. While Pear was revolutionizing wound care, other barber surgeons were still dealing with the mysteries of the human mind in the only way they knew, how by drilling into it. You look over at the barber. He's putting away the cautery irons. Thank goodness. But now he's reaching for something else. It's a tool that looks like a brace and bit, the kind you'd use to bore a hole in a plank of wood. He's taking out a small circular saw called a tree fine. Headaches? He asks the room at large, wiping a speck of dust from the serrated edge of the blade. You instinctively touch your own forehead. You thought the tooth extraction was bad. You thought the cautery was a nightmare. But you are about to witness the oldest surgical procedure known to humanity, a practice that dates back to the Stone Age and was still very much on the menu in the barber-surgeon's repertoire. They are going to open a window into the soul, literally, by carving a hole in the skull. It's called tree panning. And unlike Pear's soothing salves, there is nothing gentle about it. The barber is preparing to drill, and the reasons why range from the medically sound to the utterly mystical. He might be relieving pressure from a skull fracture, which is brilliant. Or he might be looking for the stone of madness, a mythical pebble supposed to be lodged in the brain, causing insanity. You shrink back into your seat. The battlefield progress of Pear feels a million miles away. Here, in the flickering candlelight, we are about to mix rudimentary neurosurgery with folklore. And the patient walking in for this procedure looks perfectly, terrifyingly normal, except for the desperate look in his eyes that suggests he'll try anything to stop the pounding in his head. You watch the barber center the point of the tree fine on the patient's scalp. The skin has already been peeled back a neat, triangular flap of flesh, pinned aside to reveal the ivory whiteness of the skull beneath. It is a stark, shocking contrast to the red mess of the rest of the shop. The bone looks like porcelain, smooth and defenseless. The patient is awake. He has to be. If he falls asleep, the barber can check for signs of brain damage by asking him to grunt or wiggle his fingers. He is gripping the arms of the chair so hard, his knuckles are white, his eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, desperately trying to dissociate from the fact that a man is about to use a hand-cranked drill on his head. The barber begins to turn the handle. Grind, grind, grind. The sound is unique. It isn't a wet squelch like flesh. It is a dry, rasping crunch, like someone walking on gravel or crushing a hard candy. You can feel the vibration in your own teeth just by watching. The goal here is trepanning, or trephination, the art of boring a hole into the skull to expose the dura mater, the tough membrane protecting the brain. It sounds like the invention of a horror movie villain, but this is actually the oldest surgical procedure in human history. We have found Neolithic skulls dating back 7,000 years with perfectly healed trepanation holes, meaning that Stone Age doctors were doing this with flint knives and succeeding. Their patients survived, the bone healed, and they likely went on to live normal, if slightly draftier, lives. But why? Why would you let someone do this to you? In the context of the barber-surgeon's shop, there are two distinct reasons. The first is legitimate trauma care. If you were a soldier who took a blow from a mace, or a mason who had a brick fall on his head, you might have a depressed fracture, a shard of bone pressed inward against the brain. In that case, the barber is a hero. He drills a hole next to the fracture, inserts a lever, and pops the dented bone back out, like he's fixing a fender on a 1998 Toyota Camry. It relieves the pressure, stops the seizures, and saves your life. The second reason, however, brings us back to the realm of the mystical and the bizarre. The patient in the chair doesn't have a dent in his head. He has a dent in his mind. He is suffering from hallucinations, or epilepsy, or perhaps just chronic, debilitating melancholy. In the medieval worldview, these weren't chemical imbalances. They were spiritual or physical blockages. The demon needs an exit door. The evil spirit is trapped inside the skull, bouncing around like a wasp in a jar, and the barber is simply opening a window to let it fly out. Or, even more strangely, he might be looking for the stone of madness. There was a widespread belief in the 15th and 16th centuries that madness, folly, and stupidity were caused by a physical stone growing inside the brain, much like a kidney stone or a gallstone. It was called the lithiasis of the brain. If you could just cut it out, the patient would be sane again. You've probably seen the famous painting by Hieronymus Bosch, The Extraction of the Stone of Madness. It depicts a surgeon wearing a funnel on his head, which is never a good sign, extracting a flower from a man's skull while a monk and a nun look on. It's a satire, sure, but it's rooted in a very real practice. Watch the barber closely now. He has broken through the skull. He carefully removes the circular button of bone, a souvenir the patient might keep on a necklace later, and peers into the hole. He picks up a small pair of forceps. He probes the opening. The patient groans, a low, guttural sound that vibrates in his chest. The barber frowns, digging a little deeper. Then, with a flourish that feels slightly too rehearsed, he yanks the forceps back. "Ah," he cries, "there it is." He holds up a small, dark pebble, slick with blood. He drops it into a metal basin with a satisfying clatter. "The stone of folly," he announces. "You are cured. Now, here's the secret you suspect, but can't prove. The stone was already in the barber's hand." Historians still argue whether the general public actually believed in the literal stone of madness, or if the whole thing was a known theatrical ritual, a powerful placebo effect. Did the barber know he was a con artist? Or did he believe that by producing the stone through sleight of hand, he was manifesting the cure, psychodramatically tricking the patient's mind into healing itself? It's the medieval version of a psychic surgery. The patient sees the stone, believes the source of his madness is gone, and walks out feeling clarity for the first time in years. The mind is a powerful thing, especially when you've just had a hole drilled in your head to prove a point. The barber dresses the wound with a mixture of egg white and rose oil. Thanks, Ambroise Père, and wraps the head in clean linen. The patient stands up, shaky but smiling. He pays a hefty fee for the removal of the stone. As he leaves, clutching his bandaged head, He looks like a new man. But the barber isn't done with the leftovers. He looks at the small disc of bone he removed from the skull. He doesn't throw it away. In this era, the human body itself is a pharmacy. This is the era of corpse medicine. Barber-surgeons and apothecaries believed that human bone, blood, and fat contained the vital spirit of the deceased. Ground-up skull was used to treat epilepsy. The moss that grew on the skulls of hanged men, known as usnea, was scraped off and sold as a cure for nosebleeds. It's a gruesome form of recycling that makes organ donation look positively tame. You shift uncomfortably on your bench. The air in the shop is getting heavy. You've seen bloodletting, tooth pulling, cauterization, and now brain surgery. The sensory overload is intense. The smell of the drilling, which, unfortunately, smells a lot like burning corn chips due to the friction of bone dust, is lingering in your nostrils. The barber notices you looking a bit green. You look like you need a checkup, he jokes, wiping bone dust from his apron. He motions to the shelves behind him, lined with glass flasks and jars containing wriggling dark shapes. He's right. You do feel off. But it's not just the horror of the surgery. It's the overwhelming lack of scientific method. Everything here is a guess. A stab in the dark. A drill in the skull. Yet, despite the brutality, there is a system here. It's not chaos. It has a rigid structure of diagnostics that relies on the only things they can measure. The fluids coming out of you. The barber moves to a side table. He's transitioning from surgeon back to physician proxy. He picks up a glass flask, the urinal, which is the symbol of the medical profession in this age. If the trephine is the tool of the hand, the flask is the tool of the eye. He isn't going to drill you. He's going to read you. And what he reads in the flask and what he applies to your skin next will be the difference between a diagnosis of too much blood and possessed by devils. Roll up your peg leg, he instructs, grabbing a jar from the shelf. Inside, black shapes swirl in water, hungry and waiting. You know what's coming. You've seen them in movies, usually stuck to a bog body or a hapless explorer. But here, they are FDA-approved medical devices. In fact, they are so important that the very word for doctor in Old English Leech is the same as the word for the creature. You hesitantly lift your trouser leg, revealing your pale, shivering calf. The barber unscrews the lid of the jar. The smell of swamp water wafts out, mixing with the iron and smoke. He reaches in with his bare hand and pulls out a long, glistening black ribbon of muscle. It writhes in his fingers, searching for warmth, searching for you. Best way to balance the humerus, he says softly, positioning the creature over your ankle. Nature's own needle. You flinch, bracing yourself for the bite. You've had metal driven into your arm and a tooth wrenched from your jaw, so you expect this to be another sharp, stinging assault. But as the barber guides the slick, black head of the leech against your ankle, nothing happens. Or rather, nothing painful happens. You feel a cold, wet kiss, a slight tickle, and then nothing. This is the genius of Hirudo medicinalis, the European medicinal leech. It is the stealth bomber of the animal kingdom. Nature, in her infinite, slimy wisdom, has equipped this creature with a saliva that is a pharmaceutical marvel. First, it injects a powerful local anesthetic, instantly numbing the area so the host, that's you, doesn't notice the intrusion. Then, it introduces a vasodilator to widen your blood vessels, ensuring a steady flow. Finally, it releases hirudin, the most potent anticoagulant known to man, which stops your blood from clotting. It is a sophisticated, three-pronged chemical attack designed to keep the tap running without you feeling a thing. You watch with a mix of revulsion and fascination as the creature begins to feed. It anchors itself, its body pulsing rhythmically. As it fills, it transforms. The flat, black ribbon swells, turning into a bloated, dark red sausage. It's disgusting, absolutely, but in the logic of the barbershop, It is also incredibly gentle. Unlike the lancet, which leaves a scar and hurts like hell, the leech is subtle. It's the preferred method for delicate patient's children, the elderly or squeamish aristocrats who faint at the sight of a knife. While the leech does its work, quietly draining the bad blood from your tired limb, the barber turns his attention to the other half of the diagnostic duo, the flask. He picks up the vessel you provided earlier. It is a round-bottomed glass container known as a matula. In the iconography of the Middle Ages, this flask is as iconic as the stethoscope is today. Saint Cosmas and Saint Damien, the patron saints of medicine, are almost always depicted holding one up to the light. It was the crystal ball of the medical profession, the window through which they peered into the internal workings of the body. The barber holds the matula up against the flickering flame of a tallow candle. The amber liquid glows, casting strange, refracted patterns on the plaster wall. He isn't just looking at the color. He is performing a rigorous multi-step analysis known as uroscopy. He consults a chart on the wall next to the zodiac man. This is the urine wheel, a color wheel that would look right at home in a modern graphic design studio. Except instead of Pantone shades, it features 20 distinct hues of human waste, ranging from crystal pale, meaning digestion is raw, to green as cabbage, which is bad, to black as ink, which usually means you should start writing your will. The barber hums, swirling the flask gently. A bit cloudy in the middle region. Suspensions are heavy. He's looking at the sediment. In medieval theory, the urine in the flask separates into layers that correspond to the body. The top layer represents the head, the middle is the torso, and the bottom is the lower body. If he sees bubbles on top, you have a headache. If there's sediment on the bottom, your legs are the problem. It is a system of sympathetic magic wrapped in the guise of observation. But here is where it gets interesting. While much of this was guesswork, or piss prophecy, as the skeptics eventually called it, some of it was surprisingly accurate. Barber surgeons and physicians could detect jaundice by the brown tint, or kidney failure by the red. And then there is the most famous test of all, the taste test. You watch, horrified, as the barber dips a finger into the flask and touches it to his tongue. He smacks his lips thoughtfully. You recoil, shifting your leg and disturbing the leech, which bobs indignantly. But the barber is serious. He is checking for sweetness. If the urine tastes like honey, it indicates a condition the ancients called the pissing evil, where the flesh melts into urine. We know it today as diabetes mellitus. Mellitus, literally meaning sweet like honey. It was one of the few diagnoses where the barber surgeon could be 100% correct, purely by using his own senses. There is a robust scholarly debate today about how much of uroscopy was essentially theater, a way to make the patient feel seen, and how much was a legitimate ancestor to modern urinalysis. Some historians argue that by focusing so heavily on the visuals of the waste, they missed the chemical reality, while others claim it was the only piece of empirical data they had in a world without X-rays. The barber wipes his finger on his apron, which is really starting to become a biohazard zone, and gives you the verdict. Not sweet, he says, but the color is fiery. You have an excess of color. The leech is necessary. You look back down at your ankle. The leech has done its job. It is now fully gorged, looking like a glossy, overstuffed grape. With a final, sluggish movement, it detaches itself from your skin and falls onto the floor with a wet thud. It is too heavy to move. It has consumed 5 times its body weight in your blood and will now need to sleep for months to digest it. A barber scoops the sated creature up and drops it into a separate jar of water to purge. He then applies a bit of salt or ash to the tiny, Y-shaped bite mark on your ankle. Because of the anticoagulant the leech injected, the wound is still bleeding freely. This is actually part of the therapy, the passive bleeding that continues after the creature is gone. The leech collectors will be by tomorrow, the barber chats idly as he bandages you up. Price is going up. Harder to find good ones these days. This is a quirky economic reality of the time. The demand for leeches was so insatiable millions were used in Paris alone every year that it spawned an entire industry of leech collectors. These were usually poor women who would wade bare-legged into marshes and ponds, using themselves as bait. They would walk through the reeds, wait for the leeches to latch onto their legs, then wade out, peel them off, and sell them to the barbers. It was a miserable, itchy, bloody living, but it kept the medical industry turning. By the 19th century, they had actually hunted the European medicinal leech to near extinction in some countries, leading to the world's first Save the Leeches conservation efforts. You sit there, leg bandaged, feeling a strange sense of deflation. The shop is quiet again. You've been shaved, bled, drilled vicariously, and leeched. You are a showcase of the barber-surgeon's heart. But as you look at the barber, you realize that despite his skills, he is still a second-class citizen. He is still the guy the physician bosses around. He is still the short robe. But that is about to change. The year is 1686, and the sun is setting on the era of the humble barber. A medical crisis is brewing in the most important bottom in Europe, the royal posterior of King Louis XIV of France. The king has a problem. A very painful, very private problem that no amount of uroscopy or leeching can fix. He has an anal fistula. It sounds like the setup for a dirty joke, but this single ailment is about to alter the course of surgical history. It will elevate the status of the man with the knife from a tradesman to a gentleman. The barber is finishing with you now, wiping down the counter, unaware that his profession is on the brink of a golden age. You're all set, he says, taking your coin. Stay off that leg. You stand up, testing your weight. You feel lighter, cleaner, and only slightly woozy. You have survived the shop of red and white. But as you head for the door, we are going to follow the timeline forward to the opulent bedroom of Versailles, where the stakes are higher, the wigs are bigger, and the surgery is about to become a national spectator sport. The king is in pain. The physicians are helpless. And a barber-surgeon named Charles Francois Felix is sharpening a custom-made knife, sweating bullets, and preparing to perform the operation that will finally cut the tension between the robes and the razors. You leave the muddy, blood-stained floor of the local barber shop behind and travel geographically and socially upward. We are trading the smell of stale beer and turnips for the scent of heavy perfume, powdered wigs, and absolute power. You are now walking through the gilded halls of the Palace of Versailles in the year 1686. The air here is stiflingly hot, filled with the murmur of courtiers who are terrified of doing the wrong thing. And right now, the most dangerous thing you can do is ask the king how he is sitting. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who built this impossible palace and declared, "I am the state," is in agony. But it isn't a battle wound or an assassin's poison that has laid him low. It is something far more humiliating and, frankly, pedestrian. The most powerful man in Europe has an anal fistula. To put it politely, an abscess near the royal posterior has tunneled its way into the rectum. It is painful, it is infected, and it is refusing to heal. For months, the king has been limping through court, maintaining a stoic mask while his insides burn. His team of elite physicians, the long robes we met earlier, have tried everything in their non-surgical repertoire. They have applied poultices. They have prescribed enemas. They have suggested prayers and poured holy water. They have probably debated the alignment of Mars. But the fistula remains, throbbing with a republican disrespect for the monarchy. The failure of the physicians is the barber-surgeon's opportunity. The king's personal medical team finally admits defeat and calls in Charles Francois Felix. Felix is a barber-surgeon. By court standards, he is a manual laborer, a man who works with his hands rather than his mind. But he is the only man in France who possesses the technical skill to physically cut the problem out. Imagine the pressure on this man. In the barber shop, If you slip and nick a customer, you might lose a tip or get into a fistfight. Here, if Felix's hand shakes, if the knife slips, or if the king dies from infection, Felix won't just be fired. He will likely be executed and his family ruined. It is the highest stakes haircut in history. Felix knows this. He examines the king and realizes that the standard tools, the heated irons and rough probes, won't work for such a delicate area. He needs to invent a new procedure. But you don't experiment on the King of France. You practice. This brings us to one of the darkest chapters in medical history, a quirky tidbit that is more of a horror story. Felix asks for a grace period to prepare. For 6 months, he turns the hospitals of Paris into his personal training ground. He orders that anyone suffering from a similar condition be brought to him. These are the poor, the destitute, the forgotten people of the city. You watch from the shadows as Felix operates on dozens of these volunteers. He is refining his technique, testing new instruments. Many of these patients do not survive. They die from hemorrhage or sepsis. The history books record that they were buried quietly at sunrise, without ringing the church bells, so that the king wouldn't hear the tolling and lose his nerve. It is a grim reminder that the road to modern surgery is paved with the bodies of the poor who had no say in the matter. Through this bloody trial and error, Felix invents a specific instrument, a long, slender, curved scalpel with a royal curve, designed to guide the blade safely into the fistula without damaging the surrounding muscle. He calls it the bistouri et la royale. He is ready. The date is set. November 18th, 1686, 7 a.m. You are standing in the king's bedchamber. The curtains are drawn to let in the morning light. The room is crowded, but silent. The king lies on his stomach on the edge of the bed, a bolster under his hips to elevate the surgical field. Standing over him is Felix, holding the custom knife. Behind him stands the Minister of War, Louveau, holding the king's hand, not for comfort, but to hold him down if he thrashes. There is no anesthesia. There is no antiseptic. There is only the steel and the surgeon's nerve. Louis XIV, to his credit, is tough as nails. He reportedly refuses to be bound, saying, "Is it not right that I, who have caused so much pain to others, should suffer a little myself?" A nice sentiment, though it probably didn't make the incision feel any better. Felix works quickly. He inserts the probe, finds the track of the fistula, and with a decisive stroke of the bistouri, slices it open to allow it to heal from the bottom up. He cleans the wound with wine, the closest thing to an antiseptic they had, and packs it with lint. The entire operation takes minutes. The king does not scream. He grunts. His knuckles turn white as he squeezes the minister's hand, but he holds still. When it is over, Felix bandages the royal rear, steps back, and probably exhales for the first time in 6 months. The outcome is a triumph. The king recovers. Within a month, he is back on horseback, conducting the business of state. Felix is hailed as a hero. He is given a massive fortune, a country estate, and a title. But the real winner is the profession itself. Suddenly, surgery is fashionable. This is the moment the tide turns. Because the king had the operation, the courtiers, sycophants that they are, decide that they want the operation too. It becomes the year of the fistula in Versailles. People who don't even have fistulas start wearing bandages around their bottoms in solidarity. Others who have minor hemorrhoids demand to be operated on by Felix, just to say they had the royal operation. The social barrier between the physician and the surgeon begins to crumble. Louis XIV, grateful for his cure, elevates the status of the barber-surgeons. He establishes the Académie Royale de Chirurgie, Royal Academy of Surgery, later in his reign, officially recognizing surgery as a distinct and respected discipline. The man with the knife is no longer just a glorified butcher. He is a savior of kings. There is a delightful, though hotly debated, musical legend associated with this event. Some historians and musicologists argue that during the king's recovery, the nuns of the school of Saint Cyr wrote a hymn to pray for his health. Grand Dieu sauve l'arrow, great God save the king. The story goes that the composer Handel heard this tune while visiting France, liked it, and took it back to England, where it eventually became God Save the King, God Save the King, Queen. While most modern scholars dismiss this as a patriotic urban myth and a bit of French wishful thinking, it speaks to the cultural magnitude of this specific surgery. The king's buttock was so important that it potentially inspired the British national anthem. As you linger in the golden glow of Versailles, watching Felix clean his silver instruments, you realize the world has shifted. The short robes are ascending. The practical knowledge gained from the battlefield and the boldness of the barbershop are finally being recognized. The separation between knowing medicine and doing surgery is beginning to look ridiculous. But while the king is healing in luxury, there is a bottleneck forming in this brave new world of surgical science. To be a great surgeon, you need to know anatomy. You need to know where the nerves are, how the muscles layer, and how the organs sit. And you can't learn that from a book. You need a body. A real human body. The problem is, there aren't enough of them. The law only allows surgeons to dissect the bodies of executed criminals, and there are only so many hangings to go around. As the prestige of surgery rises, so does the demand for fresh cadavers. The barber-surgeons, now hungry for knowledge and respect, are hitting a wall. And when legal means fail, the market provides. You are about to leave the scented halls of Versailles for a much darker, earthier setting. The surgeon needs a body, and there are plenty of them available, if you know where to dig and don't mind disturbing the peace of the dead. The golden age of surgery is about to spawn the dark age of the resurrection men. You leave the perfumed, candlelit grandeur of Versailles and step into a fog so thick you can taste the coal dust on your tongue. The year has advanced to the late 18th or early 19th century. We are in London now, or perhaps Edinburgh, cities where the pursuit of medical knowledge has outpaced the supply of legal raw materials. The moon is a sliver of pale bone in the sky, offering just enough light to see the tombstones jutting up from the earth like crooked teeth. You are standing in a graveyard at 2 a.m. It is freezing. The ground is hard, the silence is heavy, and you are not alone. Crouched near a fresh mound of dirt are 3 men. They are not mourners. They are resurrection men, or sack-em-up men. They are the dark supply chain of the surgical revolution. As the barber-surgeons evolved into professional anatomists, their hunger for bodies became insatiable. The law typically allowed the company of surgeons only a handful of bodies per year, usually murderers hanged at Tyburn. But a busy anatomy school needed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of cadavers to teach students how to cut without killing. So, a new trade was born. These men in the dark aren't doctors. They are laborers, thugs, and entrepreneurs of the underground. Watch them work. It is a surprisingly delicate operation. They don't dig up the whole coffin. That takes too long and makes too much mess. Instead, they dig a narrow, vertical shaft down to the head of the casket. They use wooden shovels because metal ones clang too loudly against the stones. Silence is survival here. Once they reach the wood, they use iron hooks to pry open the lid. Then they drop a rope with a noose down the hole, fish it around the neck of the deceased, and heave. With a sickening sucking sound of earth and fabric giving way, the body is dragged up, through the dirt, stripped of its burial shroud. Stealing the clothes was a felony, but stealing the body was only a misdemeanor, a legal loophole they exploited masterfully, and shoved into a sack. The whole process takes less than 30 minutes. They fill the hole, scatter some straw over the fresh dirt to hide their tracks, and vanish into the fog. The body, which was resting in peace an hour ago, is now on its way to the back door of a prestigious medical school, where a surgeon will pay cold, hard cash for it, no questions asked. This is the dirty secret of the Enlightenment. The glorious progress of medical science the beautiful anatomical drawings, the life-saving procedures. They were all built on a foundation of grave robbing. You follow the cart through the winding streets to the anatomy theater. It is a stark contrast to the graveyard. Inside, the room is brightly lit for the time, smelling of preservatives and decay. The surgeon, no longer a humble barber, but a gentleman scholar, is waiting. He inspects the goods. He doesn't ask where it came from. He knows. He might even recognize the face. It wasn't uncommon for students to dissect people they had seen walking the streets a few days prior. This demand led to a bizarre arms race between the grieving families and the resurrectionists. You can see evidence of this if you visit old graveyards today. Look for the morgue-safe's heavy iron cages placed over graves. Look for the high stone walls topped with broken glass. Watchtowers were built so families could hire guards to shoot anyone lurking with a shovel. The rich could afford deep graves and iron coffins. The poor were easy pickings. It was a final indignity. The poor were worked to death in life and then harvested for parts in death. But grave robbing was hard work. And for some, it was too hard. Why wait for someone to die when you can just speed the process up? This brings us to the infamous duo of Burke and Hare. You've likely heard their names whispered in the folklore of horror. They were two Irish immigrants living in Edinburgh in the 1820s. They weren't resurrection men in the traditional sense. They were lazy. They realized that digging up bodies was exhausting. So, when a tenant in their lodging house died of natural causes, they sold the body to Dr. Robert Knox, a brilliant and popular anatomy lecturer. Knox paid well £7 and 10 shillings, a small fortune. Burke and Hare looked at the money, then at each other, and had a terrible idea. They didn't rob graves. They lured lonely, vulnerable people back to their room, got them drunk on whiskey, and then suffocated them, a method that left no marks, now grimly known as burking. They sold the fresh, warm bodies to Dr. Knox, who, again, asked no questions, despite the fact that the bodies were suspiciously fresh and unburied. They murdered at least 16 people before they were caught. The scandal rocked the medical establishment. It exposed the voracious, unregulated appetite of the surgeons. The public was outraged. Mobs attacked medical schools. The Burke and Hare rhyme became a terrifying nursery song. Up the close and down the stair, butt and ben with Burke and Hare. Burke's the butcher, Hare's the thief, Knox the boy that buys the beef. You stand in the corner of the dissection room, looking at the anatomical charts on the wall. They are beautiful, detailed maps of the human machine. But now, every time you look at a muscle or a nerve, you wonder, whose body revealed that secret? Was it a criminal? A grandmother dug up from her rest? Or a victim of the Edinburgh butchers? This dark chapter forced a change. The Anatomy Act of 1832 was passed in Britain, finally regulating the supply of cadavers. It allowed people to donate their bodies to science and permitted the use of unclaimed bodies for workhouses and hospitals. It killed the resurrection trade overnight by making legal bodies cheap and plentiful. But the legacy remains. The surgeon had gotten what he needed. He had looked inside. He had mapped the territory. And with this knowledge, he was finally ready to cut the cord with his old partner, the barber. The tension we saw in the shop, the rivalry between the robes and the razors, has reached its breaking point. The surgeons, now armed with anatomical knowledge and royal charters, are embarrassed by their association with the men who cut hair. They want a divorce. They want to be seen as scientists, not tradesmen. The next section of our journey takes us to the lawyer's office, where the final bureaucratic split happens. It is the end of an era. The pole is about to be sawed in half. The razors will stay in the shop, and the scalpels will move to the hospital. The barber-surgeon is about to become an extinct species, or at least two very different species. As you step out of the anatomy theater, blinking in the morning light, you leave the smell of the grave behind. But the image of the resurrection men, lingers a reminder that the clean, white coat of the modern doctor has a hem that was once dragged through the mud. The year is 1745. We are stepping out of the shadows of the graveyard and into the stiff, bureaucratic air of a London Guildhall. The atmosphere here is dry, dusty, and crackling with the kind of tension usually reserved for a messy celebrity divorce. On one side of the room, you have the barbers, the men of the razor, the pole, and the soap bowl. They look practical, grounded, perhaps a little confused as to why their longtime partners are suddenly too good for them. On the other side, you have the surgeons. They are wearing powdered wigs that are just a little bit taller, coats that are a little more expensive, and expressions that scream, "It's not you, it's..." Well, actually, it is you. For over 200 years, these two professions had been legally joined at the hip under the Company of Barber-Surgeons. It was a marriage of convenience, mandated by Henry VIII back in 1540. You can still see the painting by Hans Holbein the Younger commemorating that event. A massive, terrifying Henry VIII handing the charter to a group of men kneeling before him. But like many arranged marriages, this one was doomed to fail as the partners grew in different directions. The surgeons have been drifting away for decades. They've been spending all their time in anatomy theaters, as we just saw, and hanging out with physicians. They've started learning Latin. They've started publishing papers. They are tired of being associated with the guy who sells hair tonic and pulls teeth for a shilling. They want respectability. They want to be considered gentlemen of science, not tradesmen of the service industry. The barbers, meanwhile, are just trying to run a business. They are the ones who kept the guild afloat financially, because everyone needs a haircut, but not everyone needs a leg amputated. They feel, rightly so, that the surgeons are getting a bit big for their britches. The inevitable split happens with the passing of an Act of Parliament in 1745. It officially dissolves the United Company of Barber-Surgeons and creates two separate entities. The Company of Surgeons, which eventually becomes the Royal College of Surgeons, and the Company of Barbers, which becomes, well, just barbers. You watch as the assets are divided. It is petty and precise. The surgeons get the anatomical specimens, the surgical instruments, and the books. The barbers get the haul, the silver plates, and crucially the pole. Yes, the barbers keep the red and white striped pole. The surgeons, in their quest for dignity, abandon the very symbol of their bloody origins. It's a symbolic shedding of skin. By leaving the pole behind, they are saying, "We don't bleed people anymore. We operate." This great divorce marks the official end of the medieval medical model in the city. The surgeon moves out of the shop and into the hospital. He stops being a walk-in service provider and becomes a consultant. His fees skyrocket. His social status climbs. He starts washing his hands, not yet for germs, but to separate himself from the filth of the trade. But while the surgeons are high-fiving each other in their new exclusive club, the barbers are left in a strange position. They have lost their medical authority. They can no longer perform surgery. They are legally restricted to cutting hair, shaving beards, and pulling teeth. Yes, for a long time, dentistry remains the Wild West, stuck in the barber's chair, because the gentlemen surgeons still think looking inside a mouth is beneath them. However, just because the divorce is finalized in London doesn't mean the barber surgeon vanishes from the face of the earth. History is rarely that clean. While the elite surgeons of Europe are creating colleges and writing textbooks, there are places where the old ways are not only alive, but essential. You step away from the legal proceedings and the ink-stained documents of 1745. The scene shifts. The cobblestones of London dissolve into dust-red, gritty dust. The narrow streets widen into vast, open plains. The smell of old paper is replaced by the scent of pine, campfire smoke, and raw whiskey. We are traveling to the frontier. Welcome to the American colonies, or perhaps the expanding edges of the British Empire in the 18th and 19th centuries. Here, out on the edge of the map, The Great Divorce of 1745 means absolutely nothing. When you are 3 weeks' ride from the nearest city, you don't care if the guy fixing your broken arm has a diploma from the Royal College or a certificate from a barber's guild. You just care if he has a splint and a steady hand. In these rugged outposts, the barber-surgeon survives as a necessity. The local healer is often a jack of all trades. He might be the blacksmith, the tavern keeper, or the barber, but if he owns a sharp knife and has the stomach for blood, he is the doctor. This is frontier medicine. It is brutal, practical, and heroic in its own messy way. There is no anesthesia here, just like in the medieval shop. But instead of the stone of madness, the challenges are arrow wounds, bear maulings, and farming accidents. Imagine you are a settler in the Ohio Valley. You've sliced your leg open with an axe while clearing land. You are miles from civilization. You are carried into the nearest settlement, which is essentially 3 log cabins and a muddy track. You are brought to the barber surgeon. He doesn't have a white coat. He's wearing buckskins. He's chewing tobacco. He looks at the wound. He doesn't consult a zodiac chart. He doesn't check your urine flask. He pours homemade whiskey into the wound to clean it, which, honestly, is better than the old boiling oil trick. Then, he pours a significant amount of whiskey into you. Bite on this, he says, handing you a leather strap. It's the same instruction given in the 14th century, just with a different accent. He stitches you up with a needle used for sewing canvas tents and thread made of animal sinew. It's rough. It leaves a gnarly scar, but you live. This survival of the barber-surgeon archetype on the frontier reminds us that medical progress is at a straight line. It's a jagged edge. While London surgeons are debating the finer points of anatomy in marble halls, their frontier counterparts are keeping the old traditions alive out of sheer desperation. And there is a certain romance to it, isn't there? The idea of the self-reliant healer, the community pillar who cuts your hair on Sunday and sets your bones on Monday. It's a connection that the modern world has lost. Today, your doctor is a stranger you see for 15 minutes once a year. The frontier barber surgeon was a man you drank with, traded with, and trusted with your life because there was no one else. But as the frontier closes and civilization creeps in, the barber surgeon is pushed further and further into the margins. The medical laws tighten. The licenses become mandatory. The quacks and the empirics are slowly outlawed. Yet the memory of the barber surgeon doesn't just fade away into dusty history books. It seeps into our culture. It becomes part of our nightmares. Because there is something inherently terrifying about sitting in a chair, unable to move, with a stranger holding a razor to your throat. That vulnerability is primal. And in the 19th century, storytellers began to exploit that fear, turning the helpful barber surgeon into a monster. You are sitting on the porch of the frontier cabin, the whiskey buzzing in your head, the stitches pulling tight. The sun is setting. The shadows are getting long. And in those shadows, a legend is growing. A legend about a barber in London who didn't just cut hair and didn't just pull teeth, but did something far, far worse. We are about to leave the clean air of the frontier and dive back into the smog of Victorian London, into the pages of a penny dreadful, to meet the most famous barber surgeon who never existed, and to understand why we are still just a little bit afraid when the cape goes on and the chair tilts back. You are miles from the nearest hospital. In fact, you are miles from the nearest paved road. The polished floors of the London Guildhall and the marble of Versailles are distant memories, fading like a dream upon waking. Here, the reality is grit, dust, and the endless, oppressive horizon of the frontier. Whether you are on the deck of a frigate in the middle of the Atlantic or in a mining camp in the American West, the rules of civilization have been suspended. And in this vacuum, the barber surgeon didn't just survive. He mutated into something wilder, rougher, and absolutely essential. Welcome to the era of whiskey medicine. You find yourself sitting on a crate in a makeshift tent. The canvas flaps violently in the wind. The man attending to you isn't wearing a robe or a wig. He's wearing a stained linen shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-weathered arms. He might be the ship's cook, a company clerk, or a traveling doctor who rolled into town on a wagon painted with miraculous claims. But right now, he is the only thing standing between you and a slow death from gangrene. Your ailment? Let us say it is a gunshot wound, a common enough occurrence in the colonies, or perhaps a crushed limb from a falling mast. The diagnostic phase is short. There are no flasks of urine here. There are no horoscopes. The frontier barber-surgeon looks at the wound, pokes it with a finger that tastes of tobacco, and nods. It's gotta come off, or I gotta go in and get the lead. This is where the whiskey anesthesia comes into play. It sounds like a cowboy cliché, a trope from a John Wayne movie, but the reliance on alcohol as a surgical tool was a desperate chemical reality. Before the widespread adoption of ether and chloroform in the mid-19th century, alcohol was the only accessible depressant. The barber hands you a bottle. It's not fine brandy. It's rot gut, rough, distilled spirits often laced with turpentine, ammonia, or gunpowder to give it a kick. You drink, and you keep drinking. The goal isn't to make you tipsy. It is to push you toward the brink of alcohol poisoning. The surgeon needs you in a state of stupor, where your motor functions are impaired enough that you won't thrash, and your memory formation is blocked, so you won't remember the worst of it. But here is the medical debate that raged even then. Does alcohol actually help? Many surgeons argued that alcohol acted as a stimulant, increasing the heart rate and making the patient bleed more. Others believed it shocked the system. But on the frontier, nobody cared about the academic debate. They cared that if you were passed out, you weren't screaming. While you nurse the bottle, the barber prepares his tools. In this environment, the kit is terrifyingly multi-purpose. The saw used for your leg might be the same saw used to cut firewood earlier that morning. The probe for finding the bullet might be a heated knitting needle. There is no sterilization. The closest thing to hygiene is the laudable pus theory, the mistaken belief that a creamy discharge from a wound was a sign of healing, rather than a raging staph infection. One of the most peculiar and widespread treatments you might encounter in this frontier setting is the blue mass pill. If you complained of almost anything constipation, melancholy, toothache, or tuberculosis, the frontier doctor would likely prescribe these small blue-gray spheres. They were essentially pure mercury, mixed with chalk and licorice to hide the metallic taste. Imagine swallowing liquid metal to cure a stomach ache. The mercury would indeed clear your system, violently, but it also slowly poisoned you. It caused your teeth to fall out, your gums to bleed, and your mind to unravel. It is widely believed that Abraham Lincoln suffered from mercury poisoning due to his reliance on blue mass pills for his hypochondria, leading to his erratic outbursts before he wisely stopped taking them during the Civil War. But you, sitting in this tent, don't know that. You just swallow the pill and hope for the best. Now, let's shift the scene slightly to the other great frontier, the sea. The ship's barber-surgeon was a unique breed. Enclosed in a wooden tub floating on a hostile ocean, he had to be inventive. If you broke a leg during a storm, he couldn't just set it. He had to set it while the floor beneath him pitched at a 45-degree angle. Maritime surgeons developed specific, gruesome skills. They were masters of the tobacco smoke enema. Yes, you heard that correctly. In the 18th century, a standard resuscitation kit for drowning victims included a bellows designed to blow tobacco smoke up the rectum. The theory was that the warmth and the stimulation of the nicotine would jumpstart the system and revive the patient. It was so popular that resuscitation kits were hung along the River Thames for emergencies. On a ship where drowning was a constant risk, the barber surgeon was the man with the bellows. The phrase blowing smoke up your, well, you can guess the rest. And yes, that is one potential origin of the idiom. Back in the tent, the whiskey has done its work. The edges of your vision are dark. The barber surgeon nods to his assistants, usually two of the strongest men available, to hold you down. This is the moment of truth. He works with a speed born of necessity. If he is removing a bullet, he uses a bullet screw, a corkscrew-like device inserted into the wound to drill into the lead ball and pull it out. If he is amputating, he cuts the flesh, saws the bone, and sears the vessels in under 3 minutes. The pain is there, distant and dull, throbbing behind the wall of alcohol. But what's fascinating is the transaction that follows. On the frontier, cash is scarce. You might pay him in chickens, in corn, or in labor. The barber surgeon is woven into the fabric of the community survival. He is the one who births the babies and buries the dead. He sees the circle of life in a way the city surgeon, isolated in his hospital, never does. However, this lack of regulation had a dark side. The frontier was also the playground of the quack. As the 19th century progressed, the line between the honest, rugged barber surgeon and the traveling con artist blurred. You've seen the archetype, a man in the flashy suit standing on the back of a wagon, selling snake oil or kickapoo joy juice. These men were the degenerate descendants of the medieval charlatan. They would pull teeth for free to draw a crowd, using a brass band to drown out the screams, a trick borrowed directly from the medieval fairground. They would diagnose you with imaginary diseases and sell you bottles of colored water and opium to cure them. One popular scam was the tapeworm trap. The quack would convince you that you had a tapeworm, which, to be fair, you probably did. He would then sell you a small metal cylinder on a string, baited with sugar. You were supposed to swallow it, wait for the worm to stick its head inside to get the sugar, and then pull it up. It was ridiculous, dangerous, and a testament to the desperation of people who had no access to real medicine. As you stagger out of the tent, bandaged and woozy, you are witnessing the twilight of this era. The Wild West of medicine is about to be tamed. The American Medical Association is formed in 1847. Medical licensing boards begin to crack down on the untrained healers. The barber is told to stick to hair. The blacksmith is told to stick to horses. The surgeon is told to get a degree. But the legacy of the frontier barber surgeon lingers. It lingers in the home remedies. We still use the shot of whiskey for a cold, the honey for a cough. It lingers in the distrust of big city doctors that persists in rural areas. And it lingers in the fact that for a long time, the person who healed you was just a guy doing his best with a sharp knife and a bottle of rum. Yet, as the real barber surgeons faded into history, a fictional one was about to rise from the gutters of London to terrify the world. You've survived the battlefield, the plague pit, and the frontier tent. But now, we must return to the city, to a shop that looks very much like the one we started in, but with a much darker secret in the basement. The razor is no longer a tool of healing. In the public imagination, it is about to become a weapon. We are leaving the whiskey-soaked tents of the frontier and returning to the cobblestones of the city. But the London you are walking into now isn't the medieval mud pit we started in, nor is it the sterile academic hub of the surgeons. It is the London of the Victorian imagination, a place of gas lamps hissing in the fog, shadows that stretch too long, and a deep, gnawing paranoia that civilization is just a thin veneer over something rotten. You find yourself standing outside a barbershop on Fleet Street. The pole is there, spinning slowly, the red stripes looking particularly vivid against the gray grime of the building. You need a shave. You push the door open. The bell jingles a cheerful sound that feels strangely discordant with the gloom inside. The barber is waiting. He is polite. He gestures to the chair. As you sit down and tilt your head back, exposing the soft, pale skin of your throat, a primal thought flickers in your mind. It's a thought we all suppress when we sit in this chair, even today. You are voluntarily placing yourself in the most vulnerable position imaginable. You are immobilized. You are blinded by a hot towel And you are allowing a stranger to hold a lethal weapon millimeters from your jugular vein. It requires a level of absolute trust that is, when you really think about it, completely insane. And it is in this gappa, this terrifying space between the service and the slaughter, that the legend of Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, was born. You probably know the name from the musical or the movie, but the original incarnation of Todd wasn't a tragic, brooding anti-hero seeking revenge. He was a monster. He first appeared in 1846 in a penny dreadful serial titled The String of Pearls. Let's take a moment to appreciate the penny dreadful. These were the comic books of their day. Cheap, sensational stories printed on low-quality pulp paper and sold for a penny to the working class. They were filled with gothic horror, crime, and supernatural thrills. They were the stories you read by candlelight when you couldn't sleep, the ones that made you check under the bed. In the original story, you are the victim. You are a sailor, fresh off the boat with a pocket full of pearls or gold, looking for a trim before you go home to your sweetheart. You walk into Todd's shop. He chats with you. He lathers your face. He talks about the weather. And then he pulls a lever. The chair you are sitting in is a marvel of engineering. It is attached to a trapdoor. In an instant, the floor drops out from under you. You flip backward, tumbling down a chute into the dark stone cellar below. If the fall breaks your neck, you are the lucky one. If it doesn't, Todd descends the stairs with his razor to finish the job. It is the ultimate betrayal of the barber-surgeons pact. The man who is supposed to heal you, or at least groom you, is literally processing you. And processing is the correct word, because the horror doesn't end in the cellar. It continues in the bakery next door. Enter Mrs. Lovett. In the lore, she runs a popular pie shop in Bell Yard, connected to Todd's barber shop by an underground tunnel. Her meat pies are famous. They are rich, savory, and incredibly cheap. In a city where good meat is expensive, Londoners flock to her shop, lining up for a taste of her veal pies. You can see the grim irony that delighted the Victorian readers. The story is a savage satire on capitalism and consumerism. It's a closed-loop economy. Todd kills the customers to get their money. Mrs. Lovett cooks the customers to make the pies, and the remaining customers pay money to eat the previous customers. It is efficient, profitable, and utterly horrific. But here is the question that has haunted historians and folklore experts for nearly 2 centuries. Was he real? As you sit in the chair, listening to the barber strop his razor, shwick, shwick, you might comfort yourself with the knowledge that it's just a story. And technically, you're right. There is no record of a Sweeney Todd being executed at Newgate Prison. There is no trial transcript. The character in The Penny Dreadful is fictional. However, historians still argue whether the story is based on a grain of truth. There is a persistent legend of a Parisian barber in the 14th century, the barber of the Rue de la Harpe, who supposedly committed almost identical crimes. In this version, the barber would slit the throats of foreign students, and his neighbor, a pastry chef, would turn them into patties. The story goes that they were only caught because one of the victims had a dog. The faithful hound waited outside the shop for days, howling and refusing to leave until the police finally investigated and found the pile of bones in the cellar. Is the Paris story true? Likely not. It has all the hallmarks of a medieval urban legend, a xenophobic anxiety dream about what happens to travelers in the big, bad city. But the fact that the story jumped across the channel and mutated into Sweeney Todd proves how deep this fear runs. We are terrified of the idea that we are just meat, and we are terrified that the people we trust with our bodies might view us that way. The demon barber trope had a massive impact on the profession. It marked a psychological shift. For centuries, the barber surgeon was a figure of rough authority, the guy who hurt you to save you. But as the 19th century wore on, and the true surgeons moved into their sterile hospitals, the barber was left behind in his shop. Without the medical credentials to justify the blood became suspicious. If a surgeon cuts you, it's science. If a barber cuts you, it's an accident or a crime. The penny dreadfuls didn't just scare people. They reflected a changing society. London was overcrowding. You were surrounded by strangers. You ate food prepared by people you didn't know. The mystery meat in the pie became a symbol for the anonymity of the industrial city. You didn't know where your food came from, and you didn't know if the barber was crazy. This paranoia helped drive the final nail in the coffin of the old barber-surgeon model. The public began to demand hygiene. They demanded regulation. They didn't want a character with a sharp knife and a dark cellar. They wanted a professional. The fear of the demon barber actually paved the way for the sterile, white-tiled safety of the modern era. As the barber in front of you finishes his work, he wipes the razor clean. He hasn't pulled a lever. You haven't fallen into the basement. You are safe. But as you pay him and walk out into the fog, you can't help but glance at the pie shop next door. You smell the baking crust, the savory aroma of meat and gravy. And just for a second, your stomach turns. This is the legacy of the folklore. It reminds us that the history of this profession is written in blood, some of it spilled to heal, and some of it spilled in the nightmares of a public that could unquite forget that the man cutting their hair used to be the man cutting off limbs. The era of the barber surgeon is ending. The ghosts of Sweeney Todd, the resurrection men, and the battlefield amputators are fading into the mist. What comes next is the age of science, of germs, and of the striped pole becoming nothing more than a nostalgic decoration. We are moving from the dark, chaotic workshop to the bright, antiseptic future. So shake off the chill of the London fog. We are about to fast forward to the birth of the modern salon and the operating theater, where the only thing you have to fear is a bad haircut or a high bill. You step out of the fog of Victorian London and into a world that is blindingly, aggressively white. The shadows are gone, banished by the hum of electric fluorescent tubes. The smell of meat pies, stale beer, and unwashed wool has vanished, replaced by the sharp chemical sting of bleach, iodine, and that peculiar blue liquid combs float in. We have arrived at the great divergence. The messy divorce between the barber and the surgeon is finally complete, and the custody battle for your body has been settled. This is the era of the sterile turn. For thousands of years, the barber-surgeon's shop was a place of earth tones wood, leather, iron, and blood. But as we move into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a new color palette takes over. The surgeon retreats into a world of stainless steel and sterile drapes, while the barber creates a new sanctuary of chrome chairs and checkered floors. The catalyst for this change wasn't a law or a king. It was a microscopic monster. Germ theory. Imagine you are a surgeon in the 1860s. Just before this shift, you are likely wearing a black frock coat. You have never washed this coat. In fact, you are proud of how stiff it is. The crust of old blood and pus on the cuffs is your resume. It proves you are busy and experienced. You might sharpen your scalpel on the sole of your boot before making an incision. You might hold the surgical thread in your teeth while you tie a knot. Then, a man named Joseph Lister enters the scene. He reads the works of Louis Pasteur and realizes that the bad air is out killing patients' invisible creatures are. Lister introduces carbolic acid. He doesn't just wash his hands. He builds a machine that sprays a fine mist of acid over the entire operating theater. You can picture the scene. The surgeon standing in a cloud of acrid, yellow mist, coughing, his eyes watering, cutting into a patient who, for the first time in history, isn't going to die of gangrene 3 days later. It was uncomfortable, it smelled terrible, and the old guard surgeons hated it. They mocked Lister. They argued that gentlemen didn't have bugs on their hands, but the numbers didn't lie. His survival rates skyrocketed. This is where the aesthetic of medicine flips. To show dirt, you need a white background. The black frock coat is thrown into the incinerator, replaced by the white lab coat. The wooden operating table, which absorbed fluids, is replaced by metal that can be scrubbed. The surgeon transforms from a craftsman into a scientist. He becomes a figure of authority, distant and sterile. The intimacy of the barber-surgeon relationship, where the guy cutting you is also your neighbor, is severed by a wall of hygiene. Meanwhile, what is happening to the barber? Stripped of his surgical duties, the barber has to reinvent himself. He can no longer offer you a bleed or a tooth extraction. He is strictly a grooming professional now. But the hygiene revolution hits him too. In the late 19th century, a nasty fungal infection known as barber's itch, Psychosis barbai, is running rampant. It's a disfiguring rash spread by unwashed razors and towels. The public, now terrified of germs, starts looking at the barbershop with suspicion. To survive, the barbershop has to clean up its act. Enter A.B. Moeller. In 1893, in Chicago, he opens the first school for barbers. This is a massive shift. For a millennium, you became a barber by sweeping floors and watching your master until he let you hold the razor. Now, you have to study. You have to learn about sterilization. You have to pass a test. The shop itself transforms. The wooden chairs are replaced by the heavy, hydraulic porcelain and leather thrones we recognize today. Marvels of engineering that allow the barber to spin and tilt you without breaking a sweat. The back bar becomes a showcase not of leeches, but of tonics in colorful glass bottles. Bay rum, witch hazel, talc. And then there is the blue jar. You know the one. The glass cylinder filled with mysterious sapphire liquid sitting on every barber's counter. That is barbicide, invented in 1947 by a chemical engineer who hated germs as much as Lister did. It's a disinfectant, sure, but it's also a symbol. It is the barber's way of saying, I am a professional. I am clean. You are safe here. But just as the barber was professionalizing, a new invention threatened to destroy his business entirely. King Camp Gillette was a traveling salesman with a frustration. He hated sharpening his straight razor. He wanted a blade he could use once and throw away. In 1901, he patented the safety razor. It was a revolutionary idea. Suddenly, every man could be his own barber. You didn't need to visit the shop 3 times a week to be socially presentable. You could do it in your bathroom, alone, with no risk of slicing your jugular, mostly. This brings us to a quirky tidbit of business history. Gillette didn't make his money on the razors. He practically gave the handles away for free. He made his fortune on the blades. It was the original printer and ink business model. It decimated the barber trade. The daily shave customer vanished, and the barber shop became a place for haircuts and occasional treats, rather than a daily necessity. The red and white pole, once a beacon of medical aid, became a relic. In fact, the custody battle over the pole continued well into the 20th century. In many places, laws were passed explicitly forbidding anyone but a licensed barber from displaying a striped pole. It became a trademark, protected by legislation, a desperate attempt to hold on to the last shred of the old identity. There is a fascinating scholarly debate among sociologists about what we lost during this sterile turn. Some argue that by moving medicine into the hospital and grooming into the private bathroom, we destroyed a vital third place, a social hub where men of all classes mixed. The old barber-surgeon shop was a leveler. The Duke and the ditch digger both bled the same red into the same bowl. The modern salon and the modern clinic are segregated spaces. We gained safety, undoubtedly, but we lost a certain kind of community vulnerability. As you look around this modern imaginary space half operating theater, half retro barbershop, you see the final result of the journey. The surgeon is now a highly specialized demigod, wielding lasers and robotic arms, completely detached from the world of hair. The barber is a style consultant, a therapist, and an artist, wielding clippers and fading combs. They no longer speak the same language. If you asked your barber to check your mole, he'd tell you to see a doctor. If you asked your doctor to trim your mullet, he'd probably have you committed, perhaps to look for the stone of madness. The short robes and the long robes have gone to their separate corners. The blood is in the blood bank, and the hair is on the floor. But there is one thing that remains, one sensory link to the past. When you sit in the barber's chair today, and he spins you around to face the mirror, and he snaps the cape, that sound is the same. The feeling of the hot towel on your face is the same. And for a brief moment, when the straight razor touches your neck for the final cleanup, that ancient reptilian frisson of fear travels down your spine. You are safe. The razor is sterile. The barber has a license. But your body remembers the old days. It remembers when that touch meant you might be leaving without a tooth, without a liter of blood, or without a leg. The journey is almost over. The lights are dimming in the operating theater, and the barber is reaching for the aftershave. It's time for the final section, the wind down, where we reconcile these two worlds and let you drift off into a sleep that is thanks to centuries of painful, trial and error-free of tooth worms and unwanted humors. You are back in the chair, but this time the fear is gone. The knot in your stomach that tightened when you sat down in the medieval shop, the frontier tent, and the Victorian cellar has finally unraveled. You are in a modern sanctuary of grooming, perhaps a high-end revivalist shop with subway tiles on the walls and jazz playing softly in the background, or maybe just a local corner spot where the magazines are 3 years old and the conversation is timeless. The barber leans the chair back. The hydraulic hiss is a whisper of modern engineering, a far cry from the creaking wooden trapdoors of Sweeney Todd. You look up at the ceiling, but you aren't staring at soot-stained timber or the canvas of a battlefield tent. You are looking at a clean, safe world. The barber steps away for a moment. You hear the sound of running water, hot, steaming water. He returns, not with a branding iron or a jar of leeches, but with a thick plush towel that has been soaking in the heat. He shakes it out once to cool it slightly. A snap of fabric that echoes the snapping of the linen bandages on the pole outside. He places the towel over your face. The sensation is immediate and overwhelming. The heat penetrates your pores, softening the bristles of your beard, but more importantly, softening you. It wraps you in a cocoon of darkness and warmth. In this moment, blind and immobilized, you are experiencing the final evolution of the barber-surgeon's art. This towel is the direct descendant of the poultices applied by the monks in the 12th century, but stripped of the superstition. It is the gestive of Ambroise Père, designed to soothe rather than burn. It is the mercy the frontier doctor tried to offer with whiskey, now delivered through simple steam. You breathe in. The scent is complex eucalyptus, sandalwood, perhaps a hint of clove. It is a sensory callback to the vinaigrette the physician held to his nose to ward off the plague, but here it is purely for your pleasure. There is no miasma to fight, no bad air to filter, just the clean, honest smell of soap. While you lie there, cooking gently in your own relaxation, the barber is preparing the lather. You hear the clink-clack of the brush against the mug. It's a badger hair brush, soft and dense. He whips the soap into a warm, thick foam. He peels the towel back. The air hits your skin, cool and refreshing. Then comes the brush, painting your face with the lather. It feels heavy, luxurious. It covers your chin, your cheeks, your neck. You are effectively masked, hidden beneath a layer of white. And then the razor. It is a straight razor, the cutthroat. It looks terrifyingly similar to the tools we saw hanging on the wall in Section 1. The steel is the same. The shape is the same. But the intent has changed entirely. The barber pulls the skin taut with his thumb move. His ancestors used to expose a vein for bloodletting, but he uses it now to ensure a smooth glide, scrape. The sound is like sandpaper on velvet. It is the sound of hair being severed, nothing more. As the blade travels down your neck, skirting the carotid artery, you realize the profound trust that still exists here. We haven't completely severed the link to the past. We still allow another human being to hold a blade to our throat. But the social contract of the barbershop has been rewritten. He isn't balancing your humors. He isn't looking for a toothworm. He is simply trying to make you look like you slept more than 4 hours last night. There is a gentle debate among psychologists and sociologists about the role of the modern barber. Is he a poor man's therapist? For centuries, the barber was the keeper of secrets. He knew who had the French pox. He knew who was bald under their wig. He knew who was dying. Today, that confidentiality remains. You tell your barber things you wouldn't tell your spouse. He listens. He nods. He offers a grunt of validation. He is touching you. Human contact in an increasingly digital world can fixing you, not by removing a stone from your head, but by removing the weight of the world from your shoulders for 45 minutes. He wipes the blade on a towel. He isn't checking the foam for signs of melancholy or color. He's just checking if he missed a spot. The shave is finished. He wipes your face clean with a fresh, cool towel, a shock to the system that closes the pores and wakes you up. Then comes the aftershave. A splash of liquid fire that stings for a second, then settles into a dull, vibrating cool. It's the alcohol, the spirit that was once used to numb the frontier amputation, now used just to brace you for the day. The barber tilts the chair up. He spins you around to face the mirror. You look at yourself. You look cleaner, lighter. The redness of the sanguine humor is gone, replaced by a healthy glow. You have survived. You have traveled through the mud of the Middle Ages, the smoke of the battlefield, the dust of the frontier, and the fog of London, and you have arrived here, intact. You stand up and hand the barber his fee. It's a simple transaction now, devoid of the complexities of resurrection men or royal decrees. You grab your coat. As you walk to the door, you pause one last time to look at the window. The pole is there, red, white, and blue. It spins silently, an endless spiral that goes nowhere. The red blood, the white bandages, the blue veins. It is a monument to the pain, the struggle, and the sheer audacity of the men who tried to fix the human machine when they didn't have the manual. It is a beautiful, gruesome history hiding in plain sight. You step out onto the street. The air is fresh. The world is noisy, but it's a good noise. You run a hand over your smooth chin. You feel human. You feel whole. And as you walk away, leaving the shop of red and white behind you, you realize that while the surgery has moved to the hospital, the humanity, the touch, the trust, and the care stayed right here in the chair. Now the door of the shop clicks shut behind you, latching with a soft, final thud. The spinning pole slows down, its red and white stripes blurring into a gentle, rhythmic gray as the twilight settles over the street. The noise of the city begins to fade, dropping away layer by layer. The honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant sirens, they all recede, pulling back like a tide, leaving a quiet, smooth shore. You are walking home now, but your steps are slow and heavy, not with exhaustion, but with a deep, permeating peace. The history you have witnessed is drifting away. The monks are back in their silent cloisters, their chanting a mere whisper on the wind. The cannons of Ambroise Parr are silent, the smoke clearing to reveal a field of sleeping flowers. The frontier tents are folded and gone, leaving only the starlight over the open plains. There is no more pain here. The razors are dull and sleeping in their velvet cases. The fire in the hearth has burned down to soft, glowing embers that pulse with a warm, amber light. The jars of leeches are empty. The creatures have returned to the cool, dark mud of the riverbank. The drills and the saws and the irons are locked away, artifacts of a time that can no longer touch you. You are safe. You are whole. Your body is your own, unbroken and unburdened. Imagine yourself sinking into your own bed now. The sheets are cool, like that final fresh towel. The pillow is soft, cradling your head, no drills, no stones, just rest. The tension in your jaw releases. The tightness in your shoulders melts into the mattress. The world of the barber surgeon, with all its sharp edges and bright colors, fades into a sepia-toned memory, soft and distant. Close your eyes. Let the darkness wrap around you, not as a blindfold, but as a blanket. The shop is closed. The work is done. The only sound left is the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing, in and out, a peaceful tide that carries you away from the history and into the quiet now. Sleep well, knowing the razor is put away and the night is yours.